my energy levels were through the roof. I was doing great. I got freaking shredded. I'd eat everything that I could during that 2-hour window, and I got ripped. But Brandon, did you eat breakfast this morning?
I did not.
I did. Anyway, Chris, the mad scientist, and Brandon, today we're going to talk about intermittent fasting. And this is a hot topic. You see a lot of people talking about it, but I really think that you should pay attention to this entire video, even though as we started, it may sound like it's going one direction. We've got myself, I have been playing with this stuff since early 2000s, so we're coming up on well over 15 years worth of experience. Not nearly all 15 years doing that, by the way, which we're going to dive into, but some really diverse kind of takes on it. So we're going to share both our personal experiences as well as what the research shows us around intermittent fasting. So let's start with what is intermittent fasting, Brandon?
Yeah, so it's basically a dieting strategy where you are going through large fasting periods. There's so many different ways to divvy it up. My gosh, there's alternate day intermittent fasting, but most of the time, and what we're talking about specifically today, is intermittent fasting periods within a day itself. So something like 8 hours being your feeding window, 16 hours fasting, or there's 6-hour feeding windows, or there's many different windows to actually get this done or manipulate how we do this, but that's basically what it is, just periods of time where we are fasting, and then very truncated periods of time where we allow ourselves to actually eat.
Yeah, and so there's different fasting methods. So sometimes people are taking multiple days of not eating during a week or during a month. There's different, but we're going to talk about the most popular, which is the intermittent fasting, which is having a window. And usually that window is combined with your sleep because that gets you 8 hours of fasting right up front. Thus my question, did you skip breakfast? Because then that's essentially intermittent fasting, right? So let's talk about why do people go this direction? So a lot of these fasting windows are typically 12, 16, 20 hours during the day. Usually most people find it kind of following in that middle range. Yeah, let's jump into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a myriad of different claims associated with intermittent fasting. We have some of them listed up here. There's claims such as increases in HGH, which means it's perfect for muscle anabolism rates. There's decreased lethargy, decreased muscle atrophy, benefits to adherence, hypertrophy. There's all kinds of claims out there associated with intermittent fasting. And unfortunately, just like with any other dieting strategy, when people find it good for them, they kind of tend to oversell it a little bit and get into some claims that are just straight up not true, which is the next thing I want to dive into a little bit. What is the actual research consensus? Now, there hasn't been a ton of really good studies on this, but recently there was a fantastic one by Lowe et al. In 2020 with over 100 participants, very long study. I think it was over 6 months if I remember correctly, and furthermore, it was very well controlled. And what it did was it compared a intermittent fasting group with just a standard caloric deficit. It was matched for calories, matched for many different nutrient parameters, and they actually went ahead and looked at body compositions, health markers, and activity rates during this. Now, something that I found very interesting about this was actually the lead researcher in this study was a huge fan of intermittent fasting, and that's a big part of the reason why he wanted to do this study, but afterwards he actually ended up kind of veering away from the intermittent fasting as a strategy, and it's because of what they found. Now, what they found in the study was that there was no significant differences within weight loss between these two groups. So there's actually two differences between these two groups, not so much associated with weight loss. The first one being the intermittent fasting group actually had a decrease in their activity and a slight, not so statistically relevant decrease in their RMR as well. But the second one is huge. The second big difference was the intermittent fasting group, actually 65% of their weight loss was lean body mass reductions, which was way larger, twice as big as the just standard calorie deficit group. And on average, when people lose weight, 20 to 30% of it is lean body mass. So if you lose 10 pounds, 2 to 3 pounds on average is lean body mass. So 65% is quite large.
So nearly double.
Exactly.
Now, these claims, a lot of these claims that are made, there's people that will reference the science behind it, and you'll read the books, you'll read the studies, and that's where I'd say I really veer you towards these larger studies that compile all those different factors. Because if we're just looking at one thing going, hey, we've got heightened growth hormone release, we need to do that in this window because it's done that. Well, we don't know then what happens with that. Does that reduce the growth hormone response when you go to sleep? What happens when you train? There's so many other variables. When you dive too far into these little tiny details and try to extrapolate these claims that you might be able to find some supporting evidence for into the bigger picture of what that's going to do for your body, it is too complex. No one has the ability to do that, and that's where studies such as this one are where you need to look. What is the overall net effect? So again, no significant differences.
And capping off,
why do you do it though, and why have I done it?
Exactly. So I want to be very clear on this too. Is that the total research consensus right now is that, again, no differences within increased body fat loss with intermittent fasting. There's no big benefits to muscle anabolism. Definitely not. Which we'll get into that a little bit more in a second. The only real benefit that seems to be consistently shown to some degree is increased or improved blood glucose response. But again, that's only found in a few very small studies. And with larger studies like this, it was not shown, so I wouldn't be a big fan of actually talking about that so much. But there are pros to intermittent fasting and there are cons to intermittent fasting. What I want to talk about now is a bit of our experience with intermittent fasting. One of the big things that I personally experienced was some of these benefits are absolutely true. I definitely had some benefits to lethargy. I definitely had some benefits to cravings. It fit my lifestyle really well. And for people that actually suffer with things like overeating at nighttime or having a really busy lifestyle, doing something like an 8-hour window of eating 16-hour fast, that 8-16 classic intermittent fasting window, can be fantastic for adherence to a diet and controlling calorie markers.
Yeah, that is hands down why I've used it, because it allows me, without doing a whole lot of tracking and everything else, to nail calorie reduction and be able to maintain my weight or lose my weight. It fits my life. And most of my life has been working in a high pressure corporate environment, lots of stuff going on, or being a business owner where you're running from one meeting to the next, and you don't have time to sit there and have everything dialed out through the day. And so really being able to have something that fits the lifestyle, and that worked for me. Again, the heightened mental clarity. So those claims are backed on the science side. You've got two sides of your nervous system, the parasympathetic side and the sympathetic side, one being this fight or flight. And when you're in that, you have heightened hormone release, different things happening from a neurotransmitter level that are raising your awareness, which has an impact on reducing lethargy during those time periods, mental clarity, and feeding puts you into the rest and digest, right? And so if we immediately go there, so it can be great. And I found in my environment, it was really great. So my experience dates way back, and I want to reference an individual and a couple people that had influenced me that many people may not be aware of with the current people talking it. So one of these is Ori Hoffmeyer, and I think he wrote his book in the 90s or early 2000s, so maybe I picked it up right not too long after, called The Warrior Diet. And it was a 20-hour fast, 4-hour feeding window. I couldn't pull that off because by the time I got trained and by the time I got to bed, I had a 2-hour window. So I had a 22-hour fast, and I did it for 9 months. And I found, one, my energy levels were through the roof. I was doing great. I got freaking shredded. I'd eat everything that I could during that 2-hour window, and I got ripped. But I crashed. I crashed at about 6 months. I did it for 9 months. I couldn't get out of it. When we think about this, the being on that fight or flight side of your nervous system, you're going to have more release, more demands on the adrenals and everything that is on that side of it. And at the time I was doing a lot of coaching people online. So this is around 2005, 2010-ish. And I found that basically anyone that was over 200 pounds of solid lean individual, they would crash at about 6 months in. People that were 180 pounds and less were able to be quite successful with the Warrior Diet. From there, I ended up switching to, it also left me, Brandon, I was talking to you about this beforehand. I was uncomfortable doing business meetings and stuff like that because you would go on a business lunch and you'd have to explain, like, why am I weird? Why am I not eating? And so I started following an individual named Martin Birkin, known for the Lean Gains program. So he was actually the originator of the 16-8 window. And I found a great deal of success with that. And the primary protocol was built around a 16-hour fast, so 8 hours of sleep, and then not eating till a lunch, and not an early lunch, but having your lunch and then a light meal before training, so it was ending the fast with your training, but only 30% or a third of your calories were in the pre-training and 60 or 2/3 in the post-training window. And that worked really well for me. In all of these, what I found is I was able to maintain my body weight. I was able to lose weight if I wanted to very well. And I said this spans over 15 years. I probably have about half of this period of time playing with fasting strategies and the other half not, because I wasn't able to put on quality lean mass while using it. One period I did it for, I think 5 years straight was my longest. And over that period of time, I might have been able to add a pound or 2 every year to my lean body mass. It was very slow accumulation, but if I wanted to push and be, 230, 240, 250 or above in body weight, there was no way I was going to pull that off with fasting approach. So I did not. We just went through a protein series.
Yes, we just talked about how to optimize muscle protein synthesis, and that's kind of the big reservation I have about intermittent fasting strategies. Let's start out with the cons. So there's a very big increased likelihood of experiencing atrophy within being in a caloric deficit. So there's other issues like that. And when it comes to optimizing muscle protein synthetic rates, if you know anything about doing this, you'll know that we want to get about at least 4 evenly distributed, even dosed protein feedings throughout the day. There's a lot of little things like this that we have to do to really optimize our muscle protein synthetic rates, but within a intermittent fasting window, you can't do this. You really can't do this. Maybe you're going with a 6-hour window, 7-hour window, 8-hour window. Even with an 8-hour window, which is probably the most common, you're still not going to get optimal muscle protein synthetic rates if you understand the process at B with those. And furthermore, the 4-meal thing, at best, you're getting 3 good protein feedings that 8-hour window, which is just not optimal for that. Now, am I saying that you cannot experience muscle protein synthesis, you can't experience hypertrophy? No, absolutely not. He just said himself, he gained plenty of muscle, maybe not plenty, but some muscle during this period of time. And there's many people out there that can go through hypertrophy quite well. But at the same time, is it optimal? Hell to the no. If you understand muscle protein synthetic rates and how to optimize them, you'll quickly understand that it could not be optimal. And the studies are very clear with this. The current consensus of research is very clear with this. And a lot of people cite this guy up here when we start talking about it. But there's an important caveat. The devil's in the details. When people start talking about increases in human growth hormone as they're fasting, there's one important caveat. It is an acute rise in human growth hormone. It is not a chronic increase in human growth hormone. It is an anti-catabolic effect in response to fasting. It is not an anabolic effect. So it's not the same as bodybuilders taking large amounts of human growth hormone. You get those same benefits when you fast that physiologically wouldn't even make sense. You have a small increase, an acute increase as an anti-catabolic effect and nothing more. So there's a lot of zealots out there that'll point this and say, see, it's great for anabolism. Not true, which is why the studies are so clear that if anything, it is bad for muscle anabolism and it increases the likelihood of experiencing lean body mass reductions in dieting phases. But there's plenty of pros as well. As he just talked about, and I'll talk about as well, when I first did intermittent fasting, a lot of people said, oh man, it is so hard, you're gonna be hungry all the time. It's easy. It is so easy.
It's so easy.
Oh my God.
It's so much easier just to not eat, and your cravings are way less than if you're eating a smaller amount than what you actually need. I don't know how to explain it, but it works.
Yeah, and that's exactly
the first 2 weeks for some people can be a little challenging as your body adapts to it. But from there, you end up not being hungry during that period of time.
Yes, and I told Duffin right before I got on this, I'm like, man, I heard this is really hard. I'm not gonna lie, a big part of the reason why I tried it is because he's had so much success with it and he liked it quite a bit. And I asked him, like, man, some people think it's so hard or say it's so hard to do this. I'm a little nervous before I start this. He told me it's easy, and my God, was he right. It was so easy. So when we start talking about the pros, It's calorie control, controlling calorie intake. It can really help improve diet adherence. That's one of the biggest things it helps with. Busy lifestyles, it is a blessing if you live a really busy lifestyle. Then lastly, for like nighttime eaters, people that really have a bad habit of overeating at night, that's really bad. That destroys my deficit. That's my biggest issue with being a large caloric deficit trying to lose fat is I'm an overtime eater or overeater at night, and this very much helps with that because once it gets to 8 o'clock or whatever your window is, you cannot eat, and this makes it very easy to not overeat. So the big final message I want to have here is that intermittent fasting, there's a lot of zealots that oversell it. There's a lot of claims that between, just to be honest, it's kind of bullshit, but at the same time, it does have its time and place. It is very beneficial. It is at the end of the day a tool to control calorie intake and improve adherence, nothing more, nothing less.
Absolutely. I'm just going to add a slight addendum to this so far, is a couple refinements to intermittent fasting that I have found either beneficial or approach I like to administer. So one of the things that people try to do to limit the amount of atrophy sometimes is to sip on amino acids or things like that during that period of time. That actually ends up stimulating more atrophy because it throws you out of lipolysis, switches you over. We're shutting off a lot of the mechanisms that are happening by doing that. Whey protein's gonna do the same thing. What most people are not aware of, casein protein will not throw you out of lipolysis, particularly anything if you keep that under 20 grams. So, yeah, I prefer myself to have about 3/4 of a scoop of 80-20 protein in the morning, and that will help stave off. And I have found less loss in my lean body mass since I implemented that approach. So I highly recommend that you have somewhere between at minimum 10 but a maximum of 20 grams of casein protein in the morning will reduce the loss in lean body mass, but not throw you out of lipolysis or the things that are happening during that period of time. The other interesting thing is if you're having any sort of like digestive issues as a whole, intermittent fasting can be helpful a lot of times. It gives you the time for your body to digest and not be more product going in and moving through. So it can be a really effective strategy for some short-term, relief, and that might be what you need is just to get a little bit of a break on the GI system. And doing that for a couple months period of time may end up being a benefit for you. So, and also it's a really great benefit if you're pushing the heavy feedings, the hypertrophy side, and you've been doing this for long periods of time. That does become very taxing. And so switching to a break of not just only reducing your calorie intake, which is going to help get you prepped for, again, the next cycle of pushing the calorie intake up, but doing the IF will increase the effects of that. And that's why I said over the last 15 plus years, I have done 7+ years of IF, because I did a number of years up front of it, but then wanted to push my body weight up, and now it was cycling kind of back and forth between those two because I find it a really incredible priming strategy for going into those periods of pushing the hypertrophy, which is why I ate breakfast this morning, because I just finished. I've been doing IF for the last 6 months, and I'm pushing my weight up right now. Over the last month, I've actually put on about 10 pounds, and so that was a priming strategy. I'm going to use that during this period of time, and then I will probably go right back into it again. So at the end of the day, I want to reiterate Brandon's point here. The biggest thing, it's a tool to control your calorie intake. There's a number of great pros to it, but understand the negatives, or not some of the cons, but also the fact that a lot of what you're hearing on the positive side is people just overselling it because they do have good experience. People enjoy it. That's why Brandon enjoys it. I enjoy it. And that sometimes gets people to want to sell it a little bit more than what it is.